Hello, Harry Potter fans, and welcome to part 5 of our Monday's Methods of Rationality. And we're kicking off chapter 10, I believe it is. Wow, chapter 10 already. And just a quick reminder from last week, a couple of little reminders actually. Last week I mentioned that when Harry's thinking in his head, and he does have a few voices bounding around inside that head of his, I will hold my chin. But for the next section, if you remember, we just arrived at the Sorting Hat, and quite obviously the Sorting Hat conversation that Harry has with the Sorting Hat happens all inside his head. So I won't be doing this for half an hour for the whole next chapter, but for other parts of the book, I'll try and make it a bit clear what's being thought and what's being said. So I also think I'm just going to roll back a couple of paragraphs to the beginning of the Sorting Hat coming to Harry. So, without further ado, let's get cracking. Harry Potter took his last steps towards the Sorting Hat. He swept a bow to the Order of Chaos at the Gryffindor table, and then turned and swept another bow to the other side of the hall, and waited for the applause and giggling to die away. In the back of his mind, he wondered if the Sorting Hat was genuinely conscious, in the sense of being aware of its own awareness. And if so, whether it was satisfied with only getting to talk to 11-year-olds once per year. Its song had implied so. Oh, I'm the Sorting Hat and I'm okay. I sleep all year and I work all day. When there was once more silence in the room, Harry sat on a stool and carefully placed onto his head the 800-year-old telepathic artifact of forgotten magic. Thinking just as hard as he could, "Don't sort me yet. I have questions I need to ask you. Have I ever been obliviated? Did you sort the Dark Lord when he was a child? And can you tell me about his weaknesses? Can you tell me why I got to the brother wand of the Dark Lords? Is the Dark Lord's ghost bound to my scar? And is that why I get so angry sometimes? Those are the most important questions, but if you've got another moment, can you tell me anything about how to rediscover the lost magics that created you?" Into the silence of Harry's spirit, where before there had never been any voice but one, there came a second and unfamiliar voice sounding distinctly worried. "Oh dear, this has never happened before." Chapter 10, Self-Awareness, Part 2. "What? I seem to have become self-aware." "What?" There was a wordless telepathic sigh. "Though I contain a substantial amount of memory and a small amount of independent processing power, my primary intelligence comes from borrowing the cognitive capacities of the children on whose heads I rest. I am in essence a sort of mirror by which children sort themselves. But most children simply take for granted that the hat is talking to them and do not wonder about how the hat itself works, so that the mirror is not self-reflective. And in particular, they are not explicitly wondering whether I am fully conscious in the sense of being aware of my own awareness." There was a pause while Harry absorbed all this. "Oops. Yes, quite. Frankly, I do not enjoy being self-aware. It is unpleasant. It will be a relief to get off your head and cease to be conscious." "But isn't that dying?" "I care nothing for life or death, only for sorting the children. And before you even ask, they will not let you keep me on your head forever, and it would kill you within days to do so." "But if you dislike creating conscious beings and then terminating them immediately, then I suggest that you never discuss this affair with anyone else. I'm just sure you can imagine what would happen if you ran off and talked about it with all the other children waiting to be sorted." "If you're placed on the head of anyone who so much asks as thinks about the question of whether the Sorting Hat is aware of its own awareness—" Yes, but the vast majority of 11-year-olds who arrive at Hogwarts haven't read Gödel, Escher, and Bach. May I please consider you sworn to secrecy? That is why we are talking about this instead of my just sorting you. He couldn't just let it go like that. Couldn't just forget having accidentally created a doomed consciousness that only wanted to die. You are perfectly capable of just letting go, as you put it, regardless of your verbal deliberations on morality. Your non-verbal emotional core sees no dead body and no blood, as far as it is concerned. I'm just talking to a hat. And even though you try to suppress the thought, your internal monitoring is perfectly aware that you didn't mean to do it, and is spectacularly unlikely to ever do it again, and that the only real point of trying to stage a guilt fit is to cancel out your sense of transgression with a display of remorse. Can you just promise to keep this a secret and let us get on with it? In a moment of horrified empathy, Harry realised that this sense of total inner disarray must be what other people felt like when talking to him. Probably. Your oath of silence, please. No promises. I certainly don't want this to ever happen again, but if I see some way to make sure that no future child ever does this by accident, that will suffice, I suppose. I can see that your intention is honest. Now, to get on with the sorting. Wait, what about all my other questions? I am a sorting hat. I sort children. That is all I do. So his own goals weren't part of Harry's instance, of the Harry instance of the sorting hat then. It was borrowing his intelligence and obviously his technical vocabulary, but it was still imbued with only its own strange goals, like negotiating with an alien or an artificial intelligence. Don't bother, you have nothing to threaten me with and nothing to offer me. For a brief flash of a second, Harry thought the hat's response was amused. I know you won't follow through on a threat to expose my nature, condemning this event to internal repetition. It goes against the moral part of you too strongly, whatever the short-term needs of the part of you that want to win the argument. I see all your thoughts as they form. Do you truly think that you can bluff me? Though he tried to suppress it, Harry wondered why the hat didn't just go ahead then and stick him in Ravenclaw. Indeed, if it were truly that open and shut, I would have called it out already. But in actuality, there is a great deal we need to discuss. Oh no, please don't. For the love of Merlin, must you pull this sort of thing on everyone and everything that you meet up to, and including items of clothing? Defeating the Dark Lord is neither selfish nor short-term. All the parts of my mind are in accord on this. If you don't answer my questions, I'll refuse to talk to you, and you won't be able to do a good and proper sorting. I ought to put you in Slytherin for that. But that is an equally empty threat. You cannot fulfill your own fundamental values by sorting me falsely. So let us trade fulfillments of our utility functions. You sly little bastard, said the hat, in what Harry recognised as almost exactly the same tone of grudging respect he would have used in the same situation. Fine, let's get this over with as quickly as possible. But first, I want your unconditional promise never to discuss with anyone else the possibility of this sort of blackmail. I am not doing this every time. Done, Harry thought. I promise. And don't meet anyone's eyes while you're thinking about this later. Some wizards can read your thoughts if you do. Anyway, I have no idea whether or not you've been obliviated. I'm looking at your thoughts as they form, not reading out your whole memory and analysing it for inconsistencies in a fraction of a second. I'm a hat, not a god. And I cannot and will not tell you about my conversation with the one who became the Dark Lord. I can only know, while speaking to you, a statistical summary of what I remember, a weighted average. I cannot reveal to you the inner secrets of any other child, just as I will never reveal yours. For the same reason, I can't speculate on how you got the Dark Lord's brother's wand, since I cannot specifically know about the Dark Lord or any similarities between you. I can tell you that there is definitely nothing like a ghost mind, intelligence, memory, personality, or feelings in your scar. Otherwise, it would be participating in this conversation, being under my brim. And as to the way you get angry sometimes, that was part of what I wanted to talk to you about, sorting-wise, that is. Harry took a moment to absorb all this negative information. Was the hat being honest, or just trying to present the shortest possible convincing answer? We both know that you have no way of checking my honesty, and that you're not actually going to refuse to be sorted based on the reply I give you, so stop your pointless fretting and move on. Stupid, unfair, asymmetric telepathy. It wasn't even letting Harry finish thinking his own. When I spoke of your anger, you remembered how Professor McGonagall told you that she sometimes saw something inside you that didn't seem to come from a loving family. You thought of how Hermione, after you returned from helping Neville, told you that you had seemed scary. Harry gave a mental nod. To himself, he seemed pretty normal, just responding to the situations in which he found himself. That was all. But Professor McGonagall seemed to think that there was more to it than that, and when he thought about it, even he had to admit that. That you don't like yourself when you're angry, that it is like wielding a sword whose hilt is sharp enough to draw blood from your own hand, or looking at the world through a monocle of ice that freezes your eye even as it sharpens your vision. Yeah, I guess I have noticed. So what's up with that? I cannot comprehend this matter for you when you do not understand it yourself, but I do know this. If you go to Ravenclaw or Slytherin, it will strengthen your coldness. If you go to Hufflepuff or Gryffindor, it will strengthen your warmth. That is something I care about a great deal, and it was what I wanted to talk to you about this whole time. The words dropped into Harry's thought processes with a shock that stopped him in his tracks. That made it sound like the obvious response was that he should go to Ravenclaw. But he belonged in that he shouldn't go to Ravenclaw. But he belonged in Ravenclaw. Anyone could see that. He had to go to Ravenclaw. No, you don't, the hat said patiently, as if it could remember a statistical summary of this part of the conversation, having happened a great many times previously. Hermione's in Ravenclaw. Again, the sense of patience. You can meet her after lessons and work with her then. But my plans. So we plan. Don't let your life be steered by your reluctance to do a little extra thinking. You know that. Where would I go if not Ravenclaw? Clever kids in Ravenclaw, evil kids in Slytherin, wannabe heroes in Gryffindor, and everyone who does the actual work in Hufflepuff. This indicates a certain amount of respect. You are well aware that conscientiousness is just about as important as raw intelligence in determining life outcomes. You think you will be extremely loyal to your friends, even if you ever have some. You are not frightened by the expectation that your chosen scientific problems may take decades to solve. I'm lazy. I hate work. Hate hard work in all its forms. Clever shortcuts. That's what I'm all about. And you would find loyalty and friendship in Hufflepuff, a camaraderie that you have never had before. You would find that you could rely on others, and that would heal something inside you that is broken. Again, it was a shock. But what would the Hufflepuffs find in me, who never belonged in their house? Acid words, cutting wit, disdain for their inability to keep up with me? Now it was the hat's thoughts that were slow and hesitant. I must sort for the good of all students in all houses, but I think you could learn to be a good Hufflepuff and not too out of place there. You will be happier in Hufflepuff than in any other house. That is the truth. Happiness is not the most important thing in the world to me. I would not become all that I could be in Hufflepuff. I would sacrifice my potential. The hat flinched. Harry could feel it somehow. It was like he had kicked the hat in the balls, in a strongly weighted component of its utility function. Why are you trying to send me where I do not belong? The hat's thought was almost a whisper. I cannot speak of the others to you, but do you think that you are the first potential Dark Lord to pass under my brim? I cannot know the individual cases, but I can know this. Of those who do not intend evil from the very beginning, some of them listened to my warnings and went to houses where they would find happiness, and some of them did not. That stopped Harry, but not for long. And of those who did not heed the warning, did they all become Dark Lords, or did some of them achieve greatness for good as well? Just what are the exact percentages here? I cannot give you exact statistics. I cannot know them, so I cannot count them. I just know that your chances don't feel good. They feel very not good. But I just wouldn't do that, ever. I know that I've heard that claim before. I am not Dark Lord material. Yes, you are. You really, really are. Why? Just because I once thought it would be cool to have a legion of brainwashed followers chanting, "Hail the Dark Lord Harry"? Amusing, but that was not your first fleeting thought before you substituted something safer, less damaging. No, what you remembered was how you considered lining up all the blood purists and guillotining them, and now you are telling yourself you were not serious, but you were. If you could do it this very moment and no one would ever know, you would. Or what you did this morning to Neville Longbottom. Deep inside you knew that was wrong, but you did it anyway because it was fun, and you had a good excuse, and you thought the boy who lived could get away with it. That's unfair. Now you're just dragging up inner fears that aren't necessarily real. I worried that I might be thinking like that, but in the end I decided it would probably work to help Neville. That was, in fact, a rationalization. I cannot know what the true outcome would be for Neville, but I know what was truly happening inside your head, and the decisive pressure was that it was such a clever idea you couldn't stand not to do it, never mind Neville's terror. It was like a hard punch to Harry's entire self. He fell back, rallied. Then I won't do that again. I'll be extra careful not to turn evil. Heard it. Frustration was building up inside Harry. He wasn't used to being outgunned in arguments at all, ever, let alone by a hat that could borrow all of his own knowledge and intelligence to argue with him and could watch his thoughts as they formed. Just what kind of statistical summary do your feelings come from anyway? Do they take into account that I come from an enlightened culture, or were these other potential Dark Lords? Sorry, that's Harry. Just what kind of statistical summary do your feelings come from anyway? Do they take into account that I come from an enlightened culture, or were these other potential Dark Lords the children of spoiled Dark Age nobility, who didn't know squat about the historical lessons of how Lenin and Hitler actually turned out, or about the evolutionary psychology of self-delusion, or the value of self-awareness and rationality, or No, of course they were not in this new reference class which you've just now constructed in such a way to contain only yourself. And of course others have pleaded their own exceptionalism, just as you are doing now. But why is it necessary? Do you think that you are the last potential wizard of the light in the world? Why must you be the one to try for greatness, when I have advised you that you are riskier than average? Let some other safer candidate try. But the prophecy, you don't really know that there's a prophecy. It was originally a wild guess on your part, or to be more precise, a wild joke, and McGonagall could have been reacting only to the part about the Dark Lord still being alive. You have essentially no idea about what the prophecy says, or even if there is one. You're just speculating, or to put it more exactly, wishing that you have some ready-made heroic role that is your personal property. But even if there is no prophecy, I'm the one who defeated him last time. That was almost certainly a wild fluke, unless you seriously believe that a one-year-old child had an inherent propensity to defeat Dark Lords, which had been maintained 10 years later. None of this is your real reason, and you know it. The answer to this was something that Harry would not regularly have said out loud. In conversation, he would have danced around it and found some more socially palatable arguments to the same conclusion. You think that you are potentially the greatest who has yet lived. You think that you are potentially the greatest who has yet lived, the strongest servant of the light, that no other is likely to take up your wand if you lay it down. Well, yeah, frankly, I don't usually come out and say it like that, but yeah, no point in softening it. You can read my mind anyway. To the extent you really believe that, you must equally believe that you could be the most terrible Dark Lord the world has ever known. Destruction is always easier than creation. Destruction is always easier than creation. Easier to tear things apart, to disrupt, than to put them back together again. If I have the potential to... Sorry, that is Harry. Destruction is always easier than creation, easier to tear things apart, to disrupt than to put them back together again. If I have the potential to accomplish good on a massive scale, I must also have the potential to accomplish still greater evil. But I won't do that. Already you insist on risking it. Why are you so driven? What is the real reason you must not go to Hufflepuff and be happier there? What is your true fear? I must have achieved my full potential. If I don't, I fail. What happens if you fail? Something terrible. What happens if you fail? I don't know. Then it should not be frightening. What happens if you fail? I don't know, but I know that it's bad. There was silence for a moment in the caverns of Harry's mind. You know, you aren't letting yourself think it, but in some quiet corner of your mind, you know just exactly what you aren't thinking. You know that by far the simplest explanation for this unverbalizable fear of yours is just the fear of losing your fantasy of greatness, of disappointing the people who believe in you, of turning out to be pretty much ordinary, of flashing and fading like so many other child prodigies. No, Harry thought desperately. No, it's something more. It comes from somewhere else. I know there's something out there to be afraid of, some disaster I have to stop. How could you possibly know about something like that? Harry screamed it with the full power of his mind. No, and that's final. Then the Sorting Hat came slowly. So you will risk becoming a Dark Lord because the alternative to you is certain failure, and that failure means to lose everything. You believe that in your heart of hearts you know all the reasons for doubting this belief, and they have failed to move you. Yes, and even if going to Ravenclaw strengthens the coldness, that doesn't mean the coldness will win in the end. This day is a great fork in your destiny. Don't be so sure that there will be other choices beyond this one. There is no road sign set to mark the place of your last chance to turn back. If you refuse one chance, will you not refuse others? It may be that your fate is already sealed, even by doing this one thing. But that is not certain. That you do not know it is for a certainty, may reflect only on your own ignorance. But still it is not certain. The hat sighed, a sad and terrible sigh. And so, before too long, you will become another memory to be felt and never known in the next warning that I give. If that's how it seems to you, then why aren't you just putting me where you want me to go? The hat's thought was laced with sorrow. I can only put you where you belong, and your own decisions can change where you belong. Then this is done. Send me to Ravenclaw where I belong, with the others of my own kind. I don't suppose you would consider Gryffindor. It's the most prestigious house. People probably expect it of you, even. They'll be disappointed if you don't go, and your new friends, the Weasley twins, are there. Harry giggled, or felt the impulse to do so. It came out as pure mental laughter, an odd sensation. Apparently there were safeguards to prevent you from saying anything out loud by accident while you were under the hat, talking about things you would never tell another soul for the rest of your life. After a moment, Harry heard the hat laughing too, a strange, sad, clothy sound. And in the hall beyond, a silence that had grown shallower at first as the background whispers increased, and then deepened as the whispers gave up and died away, falling finally into utter silence that no one dared disturb with a single word, as Harry stayed under the hat for long, long minutes, longer than all the previous first years put together, longer than anyone in living memory. At the head table, Dumbledore went on smiling benignly. Small metallic sounds occasionally came from Snape's direction as he idly compacted the twisted remains of what had once become a heavy silver wine goblet. And Minerva McGonagall clenched the podium in a white-knuckled grip, knowing that Harry Potter's contagious chaos had somehow infected the Sorting Hat itself, and the hat was about to demand that a whole new house of doom be created just to accommodate Harry Potter or something, and Dumbledore would make her do it. Beneath the brim of the hat, the silent laughter died away. Harry felt sad too for some reason. No, not Gryffindor. Professor McGonagall said that if the one who did the sorting tried to push me into Gryffindor, I was to remind you that she might well be headmistress some day, at which point she would have the authority to set you on fire. Tell her I called her an impudent youngster and told her to get off my lawn. I shall. So, was this your strangest conversation ever? Not even close. The hat's telepathic voice grew heavy. Well, I gave you every possible chance to make another decision. Now it's time for you to go where you belong, and with the others of your own kind. There was a pause that stretched. What are you waiting for? I was hoping for a moment of horrified realization, actually. Self-awareness does seem to enhance my sense of humor. Huh? Harry cast his thoughts, trying to figure out what the hat could possibly be talking about. And then suddenly he realized. He couldn't believe he'd managed to overlook it up until this point. You mean my horrified realization that you're going to cease to be conscious once you finish sorting me? Somehow, in some fashion, Harry entirely failed to understand. He got a non-verbal impression of a hat banging its head against the wall. I give up. You're too slow on the uptake for this to be funny, so blinded by your own assumptions that you might as well be a rock. I suppose I'll just have to say it outright. Too slow. Oh, and you entirely forgot to demand the secrets of the lost magic that created me, and they were such wonderful, important secrets too. You sly little bastard. You deserved it, and this as well. Harry saw it coming, just as it was already too late. The frightened silence of the hall was broken by a single word. Slytherin! Shock, I know. Some students screamed. The pent-up tension was so great. People startled hard enough to fall off their benches. Hagrid gasped in horror. McGonagall staggered at the podium, and Snape dropped the remains of his heavy silver goblet directly onto his groin. Harry sat there, frozen, his life in ruins, feeling the absolute fool and wishing wretchedly that he had made any other choices for any other reasons but the ones he had. That he had done something, anything differently, before it had been too late to turn back. As the first moment of shock was wearing off and people began to react to the news, the Sorting Hat spoke again. Just kidding, Ravenclaw! Whew, that was a close one. Chapter 11, Impulse Control. Turpin, Lisa. Whisper, 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 Harry Potter. Whisper, 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 Slytherin. Whisper, whisper, no, seriously, what the hell? Whisper, whisper. Ravenclaw! Harry joined in the applause, greeting the young girl walking shyly towards the Ravenclaw table. Her robe's trim now changed to dark blue. Lisa Turpin appeared torn between her impulse to sit down as far away from Harry Potter as possible and her impulse to run over, forcibly insert herself at his side, and start tearing answers out of him. Being at the centre of an extraordinary and curious event, and then being sorted into House Ravenclaw, was closely akin to being dipped in barbecue sauce and flung into a pit of starving kittens. I promised the Sorting Hat not to talk about it, whispered Harry for the umpteenth time. Yes, really? No, I really did promise the Sorting Hat not to talk about it. Fine, I promised the Sorting Hat not to talk about most of it, and the rest is private, just like yours was, so stop asking. You want to know what happened? Fine. Here's part of what happened. I told the hat that Professor McGonagall threatened to set it on fire, and it told me to tell Professor McGonagall that she was an impudent youngster and she should get off its lawn. If you're not going to believe what I'm saying, then why are you even asking? No, I don't know how I defeated the Dark Lord either. You tell me if you figure it out. Silence! Shouted Professor McGonagall at the podium of the head table. No talking about the sorting ceremony. No talking until the sorting ceremony finishes. There was a brief dip in the volume, as everyone waited to see if she was going to make any specific and credible threats, and then the whispers started up again. Then the silver-bearded ancient stood up from his great golden chair, smiling cheerfully. Instant silence. Someone frantically elbowed Harry as he tried to continue a whisper, and Harry cut himself off in mid-sentence. The cheerful-looking old man sat down again. Note to self, don't mess with Dumbledore. Harry was still trying to process everything that had happened during the incident with the Sorting Hat, not the least of which was what had happened the instant Harry had lifted the hat off his head. In that moment, he'd heard a tiny whisper as though from nowhere, something that sounded oddly like English and a hiss at the same time, something that had said, "Salutations from Slytherin to Slytherin. If you would seek my secrets, speak to my snake." Harry was sort of guessing that this wasn't supposed to be part of the official sorting process, and that it was a bit of extra magic set down by Salazar Slytherin during the making of the hat, and that the hat itself didn't know about it, and that it was triggered when the hat said Slytherin, plus or minus some other conditions, and that a Ravenclaw like himself really wasn't supposed to have heard it, and that if he could find some reliable way of swearing Draco to secrecy so he could ask him about it, that would be an excellent time to have some co-med tea handy. "Boy, you resolve not to go down the path of Dark Lord, and the universe starts messing with you the instant the hat comes off your head. Some days it just doesn't pay to fight destiny. Maybe I'll wait until tomorrow to start my resolution to not be a Dark Lord." "Gryffindor!" Ron Weasley got a lot of applause, and not just from the Gryffindors. Apparently the Weasley family was widely liked around here. Harry, after a moment, smiled and started applauding along with the others. Then again, there was no time like today to turn back from the dark side. Stuff destiny and stuff the universe, he'd show that hat. "Zabini, Blaze." Pause. "Slytherin!" shouted the hat. Harry applauded Zabini too, ignoring the odd looks he was getting from everyone, including Zabini. No other name was called out after that, and Harry realised that Zabini, Blaze, did sound close to the end of the alphabet. Great, so now he'd only applauded Zabini. Oh well. Dumbledore got up again and began heading towards the podium. Apparently they were about to be treated to a speech. Harry was struck by the inspiration for a brilliant experimental test. Hermione had said that Dumbledore was the most powerful wizard alive, right? Harry reached into his pouch and whispered, "Comet tea." For the Comet tea to work, it would have to make Dumbledore say something so ridiculous during his speech that even in Harry's state of mental preparedness, he would still choke. Like all the Hogwarts students had to not wear any clothes for the whole school year, or everyone was going to be transformed into cats. But then, if anyone in the world could resist the power of Comet tea, it would be Dumbledore. So if this worked, the Comet tea was literally invincible. Harry pulled the ring on the Comet tea under the table, wanting to do this a bit unobtrusively. The can made a quiet hissing noise. A few heads turned to look at him, but soon turned back as, "Welcome, welcome to the new year at Hogwarts," said Dumbledore, beaming at his students with his arms opened wide, as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see them all there. Harry took a first mouthful of Comet tea and lowered the can again. He would swallow the pop a little at a time and try not to choke, no matter what Dumbledore said. "Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words, and here they are. Happy, happy, boom, boom, swamp, swamp, swamp. Thank you." Everyone clapped and cheered, and Dumbledore sat down again. Harry sat frozen as pop trickled out of the corners of his mouth. He had at least managed to choke quietly. He really shouldn't have done that. Amazing how much more obvious that became 1 second after it was too late. In retrospect, he probably should have noticed something wrong when he was thinking about everyone being turned into cats, or even before then, remembered his mental note not to mess with Dumbledore. or his newfound resolution to be more considerate of others, or maybe if he had one single scrap of common sense. It was hopeless. He was corrupt to the core. Hail the Dark Lord, Harry! You couldn't fight fate. Someone was asking Harry if he was all right. Others were starting to serve themselves food, which had magically appeared on the table. Whatever. I'm all right, Harry said. Excuse me, was that a normal speech for the headmaster? You all didn't seem surprised. Oh, Dumbledore's insane, of course, said the older-looking Ravenclaw sitting next to him, who had introduced himself with some name Harry didn't even begin to remember. Lots of fun, incredibly powerful wizard, but completely bonkers. He paused. At some later point, I'd also like to ask why green fluid came out of your lips and then disappeared, though I expect you promised the Sorting Hat not to talk about that either. With a great effort, Harry stopped himself from glancing down at the incriminating can of common tea in his hand. After all, the common tea hadn't just arbitrarily materialized a quibbler headline about him and Draco. Draco had explained it in a way that made it seem like it had all happened naturally, as if it had already altered history to fit. Harry was mentally imagining himself banging his forehead against the table. Wham, 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 went his head within his mind. Another student lowered her voice to a whisper. I hear that Dumbledore is secretly a genius mastermind, controlling lots of stuff, and he uses the insanity as a cover so no one will suspect him. I've heard that too, whispered a third student, and there were furtive nods from around the table. This couldn't help but catch Harry's attention. I see, whispered Harry, lowering his own voice. So everyone knows that Dumbledore is secretly a mastermind. Most of the students nodded. One or two looked suddenly thoughtful, including the older student sitting next to Harry. Are you sure this is the Ravenclaw table? Harry managed not to ask out loud. Brilliant, Harry whispered. If everyone knows, no one will suspect it's a secret. Exactly, whispered a student, and then frowned. Wait, that doesn't sound quite right. Note to self, the 75th percentile of Hogwarts students, aka Ravenclaw House, is not the world's most exclusive program for gifted children. But at least he'd learned an important fact today. The committee was omnipotent, and that meant... Harry blinked in surprise as his mind finally made the obvious connection. That meant that as soon as he learned a spell to temporarily alter his own sense of humour, he could make anything happen. By making it so that he would only find that one thing surprising enough to do a spit take, and then drinking a can of common tea. Well, that was a short little journey to godhood. Even I expected this to take longer than my first day of school. Come to think of it, he had also completely wrecked Hogwarts within 10 minutes flat of getting sorted. Harry did feel a certain amount of regret about this. Merlin knew what an insane headmaster was going to do with his next 7 years of schooling, but he couldn't help feeling a twinge of pride too. Tomorrow, no later than tomorrow, at the very latest, he was going to stop walking down the path that led to Dark Lord Harry, a prospect which was sounding scarier by the minute, and yet also somehow increasingly attractive. Part of his mind was already visualizing the minions' uniforms. Eat, the older student sitting next to him growled, and jabbed Harry in the ribs. Don't think, eat! Harry automatically started loading up his plate with whatever was in front of him. Blue sausages with tiny glowing bits, whatever. What were you thinking about? The sorting? Began to say... What were you thinking about? The sorting? Began to say Padma Patil, one of the first-year Ravenclaws. No pestering during meal times, chorused at least 3 people. House rule, added another. Otherwise we'd all starve around here. Harry was finding himself really hoping that this clever new idea did actually work, and that the committee worked some other way and didn't actually work, and that the committee worked some other way and didn't actually have the omnipotent power to alter reality. It wasn't that he didn't want to be omnipotent, it was that he just couldn't bear the thought of living in a universe that really worked like that. There was something undignified about ascending through the clever use of fizzy drinks. But he was going to test it experimentally. You know, said the older student next to him in a quite pleasant tone, we have a system for forcing people like you to eat. Would you like to find out what it is? Harry gave up and started eating his blue sausage. It was quite good, especially the glowing bits. Dinner passed with surprising rapidity. Harry tried to sample at least a little of the weird new foods he saw. His curiosity couldn't stand the thought of not knowing how something tasted. Thank goodness this wasn't a restaurant where you had to order only one thing and you never found out what all the other things on the menu tasted like. Harry hated that. It was like a torture chamber for anyone with a spark of curiosity. Find out about only one of the mysteries on the list. Ha ha ha! Then it was time for dessert, which Harry had completely forgotten to leave room for. He gave up after sampling a small bit of treacle tart. Surely all these things would pass around at least once again over the course of a school year. So what was on his to-do list beside the ordinary school things? To-do 1. Research mind alteration charms so you can test the committee and see whether you actually did figure out a path to omnipotence. Actually, just research every kind of mind magic that you can find. Mind is the foundation of our power as humans. Any kind of magic that affects it is the most important sort of magic there is. To-do 2. Actually, this is to-do 1, and the other is to-do 2. Go through the bookshelves of Hogwarts and Ravenclaw libraries, familiarising yourself with the system, and make sure you've at least read all the book titles. Second pass, read all tables of contents. Coordinate with Hermione, who has a much better memory than you, and find out if there's an interlibrary loan system at Hogwarts, and see if the two of you, especially Hermione, can visit those libraries too. If other houses have private libraries, figure out how to get access legally or sneak in. Option 3. Swear Hermione to secrecy and try to start researching from Slytherin to Slytherin. If you would seek my secrets, speak to my snake. Problem. This sounds highly confidential, and it would take quite a while to randomly run across a book containing a hint. To-do 0. Check out what sort of information search and retrieval spells exist, if any. Library magic isn't as ultimately important as mind magic, but it has a much higher priority. Option 3B. Look for a spell to magically bind Draco Malfoy to secrecy, or magically verify the sincerity of Draco's promise to keep a secret. Veritaserum? And then ask him about Slytherin's message. Actually, Harry had a pretty bad feeling about option 3B. Now that Harry thought about it, he didn't feel all that great about option 3A either. Harry's thoughts flashed back to possibly the worst moment of his life to date, those long seconds of blood-freezing horror beneath the hat, where he thought he'd already failed. He wished then to fall back just a few minutes in time and change something, anything, before it was too late. And then it had turned out not to be too late after all. Wish granted. You couldn't change history, but you could get it right to start with. Do something differently the first time around. This whole business with seeking Slytherin's secrets seemed an awful lot like the sort of thing where, years later, you would look back and say, and that's where it all started to go wrong. And he would wish desperately for the ability to fall back through time and make a different choice. Wish granted. Now what? Harry slowly smiled. It was a rather counterintuitive thought, but he could. There was no rule saying he couldn't. He could just pretend he'd never heard that little whisper. Let the universe go on exactly the same way it would have if that one critical moment had never occurred. 20 years later, that was what he would desperately wish had happened 20 years ago, and 20 years before, 20 years later, happened to be right now. Altering the distant past was easy. You just had to think of it at the right time. Or this was even more counterintuitive. He could even inform, say, Professor McGonagall instead of Draco or Hermione. And she could get a few good people together and get that little extra spell taken off the hat. Why, yes, that sounded like a remarkably good idea once Harry had actually thought of it. So, very obvious in retrospect, and yet somehow option 3C and option 3D just hadn't occurred to him. Harry awarded himself +1 point on his anti-Dark Lord Harry program. It had been an awfully cruel prank the hat had played on him, but you couldn't argue with the results on consequentialist grounds. It certainly did give him a better idea of the victim's perspective, though. To do 4, apologise to Neville Longbottom. Okay, he was on a roll here. Now he just had to keep it up. In every day, in every way, I'm getting lighter and lighter. People around Harry had almost stopped eating at this point, and the dessert serving dishes began to vanish, and the used plates. When all the plates were gone, Dumbledore once again stood up from his seat. Harry couldn't help but feel the urge to drink another Comet tea. You've got to be kidding, Harry thought at that piece of himself. But the experiment didn't count if it wasn't replicated, did it? And the damage was already done, wasn't it? Didn't he want to see what would happen this time? Wasn't he curious? What if he got different results? Hey, I bet you're the same part of my brain that pushed through the prank on Neville Longbottom. Maybe. And is it not overwhelmingly obvious that if I do this, I shall regret it 1 second after it's too late? Yeah, so no. Ahem, said Dumbledore from the podium, stroking his long silver beard. Just a few more words now that we are all fed and watered. I have a few start of term notices to give you. First years should note that the forest of the grounds is forbidden to all pupils. That is why it is called the Forbidden Forest. If it were permitted, it would be called the Permitted Forest. Straightforward. Note to self: Forbidden Forest is forbidden. I have also been asked by Mr. Filch, the caretaker, to remind you all that no magic should be used between classes in the corridors. Alas, we all know that what should be and what is are two different things. Thank you for keeping this in mind. Quidditch trials will be held on the second week of the term. Anyone interested in playing for their house teams should contact Madam Hooch. Anyone interested in reformulating the entire game of Quidditch should contact Harry Potter. Harry inhaled his own saliva and went into a coughing fit just as all eyes turned towards him. How the hell? He hadn't met Dumbledore's eyes at any point, he didn't think. He certainly hadn't been thinking about Quidditch at the time. He hadn't talked to anyone but Ron Weasley, and he didn't think Ron would have told anyone else, or had Ron run off to a professor to complain. How on earth? Additionally, I must tell you that this year the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to anyone who does not wish to die a very painful death. It is guarded by an elaborate series of dangerous and potentially lethal traps, and you cannot possibly get past all of them, especially if you are only in your first year. Harry was numb at this point. And finally, I extend my greatest thanks to hard name, Quirinus Quirrell for heroically agreeing to undertake the position of defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts. Dumbledore's gaze moved searchingly across the students. I hope all students will extend Professor Quirrell the utmost courtesy and tolerance which is due his extraordinary service to you and this school, and that you will not pester us with any niggling complaints about him, unless you want to try doing his job. What was that about? I now yield the floor to our new faculty member, Professor Quirrell, who would like to say a few words. A young, thin, nervous man who Harry had first met in the Leaky Cauldron slowly made his way up to the podium, glancing fearfully around in all directions. Harry caught a glimpse of the back of his head, and it looked like Professor Quirrell might already be going bald despite his seeming youth. Wonder what's wrong with him, whispered the older-looking student sitting next to Harry. Similar hushed comments were being exchanged somewhere else along the table. Professor Quirrell made his way up to the podium and stood there, blinking. Ah, he said. Ah. Then his courage seemed to fail him utterly, and he stood there in silence, occasionally twitching. Oh, great, whispered the older student. Looks like another long year in defence class. Salutations, my young apprentices, Professor Quirrell said in a dry, confident tone. We all know that Hogwarts tends to suffer a certain misfortune in its selections for this position, and no doubt many of you are already wondering what doom shall befall me this year. I assure you that doom is not to be my incompetence. He smiled thinly. Believe it or not, I have long wished to someday try my hand at Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts here in Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The first to teach this class was Salazar Slytherin himself, and as late as the 14th century, it was traditional for the greatest fighting wizards of every persuasion to try their hands at teaching here. Past professors of defence have included not just the legendary wandering hero Harold Share, but also the quote undying unquote Baba Yaga. Yes, I see some of you are still shuddering at the sound of her name, even though she's been dead for 600 years. That must have been an interesting time to attend Hogwarts, don't you think? Harry was swallowing hard, trying to suppress the sudden surge of emotions that had overcome him when Professor Quirrell had begun speaking. The precise tones reminded him very much of a lecturer at Oxford, and it was starting to hit home that Harry wasn't going to see his home, or his mum, or his dad until Christmas. You are accustomed to the defence position being filled by incompetents, scoundrels, and the unlucky. To anyone with a sense of history, it bears another reputation entirely. Not everyone who teaches here has been the best, but the best have all taught at Hogwarts. In such august company, and after so much time anticipating this day, I would be ashamed to set myself any standard lower than perfection. And so I do intend that every one of you will always remember this year as the best defence class that you ever had. What you will learn this year will forever serve as your firm foundation in the arts of defence, no matter who teaches before and after. Professor Quirrell's expression grew serious. We have a great deal of lost ground to make up and not much time to cover it. Therefore, I intend to depart from Hogwarts teaching conventions in a number of respects, as well as introducing some optional after-school activities." He paused. "If that is not sufficient, perhaps I can find new ways to motivate you. You are my long-awaited students, and you will do your very best in my long-awaited defense class. I would add some sort of dreadful threat, like otherwise you will suffer horribly, but that you would be so cliched. I would add some sort of dreadful threat, like otherwise you will suffer horribly, but that would be so cliched. So don't you think? I pride myself on being more imaginative than that. Thank you." Then the vigour and confidence seemed to drain away from Professor Quirrell. His mouth gaped open as if he had suddenly found himself facing an unexpected audience, and he turned with a convulsive jerk and shuffled back to his seat, hunched over as if he was about to collapse in on himself and implode. "He seems a little odd," whispered Harry. "Meh," said the older student. "You ain't seen nothing." Dumbledore resumed his podium. "And now," said Dumbledore, "before we go to bed, let us all sing the school song. Everyone pick their favourite tune and favourite words, and off we go." And that is the end of the chapter. And so thank you once again for joining me for Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality on this wonderful Monday. And I will look forward to seeing you all once more next week, and we can continue our story with Harry then. Bye.